Hello, chess fans. It's November 9th, 2022. This is Sean from the E5 Outpost, a segment for adult chess improvers who want to keep aware of some of the latest ideas and events in the chess world. Today we've got three stories that we're going to go ahead and take a look at. First up is the Fall Chess Classic in St. Louis. Round 7 just completed yesterday, so we'll briefly go over who's been playing there, and we'll take a quick glance at one of yesterday's games. After this, we'll go and talk about the Tata Steel Challengers group. In a Twitter post, Tata Steel hinted that Abhimanyu Mishra will be in next year's Challenger group, so we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his games as well. And then we'll look at this day in chess, November 9th, 1985. Garry Kasparov played one of his most important games against Anatoly Karpov. This was game 24 of the World Chess Championships. Karpov needed a win to retain his title, so we'll go ahead and take a look at that famous game 24. As well as the move that Kasparov considered one of his most difficult to find. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this game between Yangyi and Nikolas Theodorou that was played yesterday at the Fall Chess Classic. So this is a Sveshnikov. What's interesting about the Sveshnikov is that often in other Sicilian systems, in the Najdorf, in the Dragon, in the Scheveningen, White is looking to play f3, g4, h4, and is looking to build some sort of attack on Black's kingside. Black often seeks counterplay with a6, b5, and then attacks White's queenside. And so these positions often end up rather sharp. Both sides are attacking at the same time. In the Sveshnikov, actually, Black usually is looking to play f5 rather early. It's usually Black who's pushing the kingside pawns. And so White usually tries to combat this by trying to build pressure against this weak d pawn and by trying to attack in the center. In this game, actually, White decides to attack on the queen side. We'll see how that works out. Right, so this d6 pawn is rather weak. Obviously, this is usually a big target for White. White decides to play this way, threatening c7. And so, right, with this pawn structure, obviously White can't go ahead with this regular plan of attacking d6. So instead, White decides to push queenside pawns and decides to attack the queenside this way. And so we see sort of these plans develop. White already has played a4, a5, fixing this pawn on d7. White later wants to play something like rook a3, rook b3 to sort of attack this pawn that's going to become rather weak. Black has already played, obviously, e5, now f5, controlling all these central squares. Black is now going to try to go ahead and develop an attack on the king side. And so this ends up being a rather sharp game. Here's an interesting little move that I found. Bishop d8. The idea is not to attack this pawn. This isn't really what Black is trying to do in this position. Instead, if we make a nothing move, like let's say rook a7, just to demonstrate, Black doesn't want to be forced to recapture if White captures here. Black doesn't want to be forced to recapture with the pawn. Because now this pawn, this d5 pawn is very annoying for Black to deal with. Already the pawn can jump forward to d6. Already Black can... You see how Black's pieces are uncoordinated. White has plans like knight d5, already using this pawn as an outpost, for example. Plans of c5 at some point to support this pawn if needed. This is already very annoying for White to deal with. So instead of allowing the pawn structure to just change in that way, Black drops this bishop back to d8, so that if White captures here, Black can capture with a piece. Now Black gets this e5 square for sort of, maybe Black can reposition this bishop here at some point. Maybe Black wants to play something like rook h6 and build an attack on h2, but it's much more useful for Black to keep this square open for a piece than it is to occupy this square with a pawn. So of course, White knows this. White decides not to capture on e5. Play continues. Obviously, as I mentioned might happen, White continued playing on the queen side, Black continued playing on the king side. This is an interesting move here, queen g7. So once again, this position really isn't about winning pawns. This position is about sort of, my king is unsafe, I really need to build an attack on your king quickly so that way your king is also unsafe. Notice that this pawn, black might have made a different decision if, for example, this rook is somewhere on the c file and it's threatening to come to c7. Okay, maybe then black decides, okay, I'm capturing this pawn so that way it's not supporting the c7 square. I don't want you to do that. Maybe if this pawn really is threatening to come to d7 because d7 is, very easy for white to play, maybe black decides, okay, I'm going to take this pawn. Obviously, that's not the case here. This pawn's just very weak. It's not supporting anything useful, so black decides to just leave it and continue with kingside attack. These types of positions are always very difficult to play. Actually, at this point, black misplays and plays f3 too quickly. Black needed to see, and this is hard to see, that the b7 square, white is threatening to play rook b7. And actually, this is a very annoying threat to deal with because now, if this pawn leaves, this queen's going to get under attack. If this pawn queens, then there's a pin here, which is also very annoying for black to deal with. So black needed to anticipate this ahead of time and play a move like rook d8, rook f7, sort of dealing with this threat already, actually. But again, it's very, very hard to see. Black didn't see this. And so now black was forced into a position where he had to attack on the h file. This is the only file that his pieces sort of make sense down. It's not easy for black to sort of try to play against, let's say, like the e file. You can't really get any pieces over here. It's already defended by a pawn. So instead, black made operations on the h file. White played according to the maxim of if you're getting attacked on the flank, you need to counterattack in the center. So white repositioned this rook to from f1 to e1, and now is sort of attacking down the e file, obviously targeting the vulnerable king. And then it sort of became a very, very sharp game. It was already very sharp, where both sides were attacking each other's kings at the same time. White was just in a much better position, though, more successful, because white was controlling the center, and white's pieces were well coordinated to defend the king. Black's pieces, on the other hand, it was hard for them to sort of get back to the king. Black wasn't controlling the center, so black's pieces couldn't sort of reroute to the center somehow, not possible. This knight sort of just didn't have an easy time getting back in and defending the king. So white was just better. And then in this position, black resigned, playing queen b1, which overlooks the simple tactic queen h3 check, hitting both the king with check and hitting this loose knight on d7. So yeah, so an instructive Sveshnikov, white was able to get pressure on the queen side, attack this vulnerable pawn on b7. Black sort of underestimated the consequences of dropping this pawn on b7, was forced into an inferior sort of attack down the h file, while white was able to attack down the e file. And because of the better position of white's pieces, white's attack was much more successful than black's attack. So, as I mentioned earlier, yesterday, Tata Steele's chess challengers hinted at his first challenger. On his Twitter account indicated that the youngest grandmaster of all time is going to be playing in the challenger group. So we know that this is Abhimanyu Mishra. We'll go ahead and go over one of his recent games to show him in the best light. And this was played in the Spring Chess Classic earlier this year in St. Louis against Christopher Yu. This was a French. I thought this was kind of funny. He played knight b1, knight b2, and then he played back to b1. The idea is to open up this line for this bishop. This bishop later wants to support a push to f4. This bishop is going to reposition itself to e3. Right, and obviously can't do that if the knight's on d2. Knight e1, right, so white wanted to push f4. White wanted to break up these pawns maybe before black was sort of ready to push them, because if black just was able to develop slowly, queen c7, castles, bring a rook over here, maybe black can just sort of push these pawns and get a pretty easy attack. So Mishra said, all right, you're going to have to commit your pawns early. Christopher Yu captured, and this position, it's not really clear. I guess black's best might be to sort of get activity down the G file and push this H pawn. Instead, Christopher Yu sort of maybe underestimated the power of this discovered attack, maybe underestimated how good his bishop was. Because you can see, right, in this position, this bishop isn't great, this bishop is a lot better. However, Christopher Yu played f6, which seemed like an error, which seemed like a mistake. Now, in this position, obviously, both pieces here are under attack, so the only defense is to play bishop d6, but after you traded bishops, all right, this bishop used to be really bad for white, now it's off the board. This bishop used to sort of had some promise for black, now it's off the board. And we'll see later that black kind of wishes that this bishop were still here. Black's prospects are really sort of down this diagonal, really on the dark squares, but black doesn't have the minor piece to support any of that activity. So we'll see, right, this is actually sort of an instructive, a nice move, I thought, 23h4. The idea behind this move, one of them is that white doesn't want black to continue pushing this h-pawn. White doesn't want to see h4, so white plays h4 himself. Another idea, obviously, is to support this knight on g5, create an outpost over here. But the third idea, and I guess the idea that combines all of these, is that black sort of no longer has an attack on the g file. It's not like black is going to put rooks here and, you know, rook here, and say, all right, like I'm attacking here. Because he's never going to exchange these rooks for this piece. And if he's not going to use his rooks to exchange for this piece, he's going to have to use one of his knights. But it's not really obvious how to bring a knight here, right? Okay, maybe you can bring a knight to f8 here, capture over here. White will always have this recapture. And it's not really clear sort of how to break in down the g file here. Queen d6, right, so once again, we see that black sort of wishes that he had the dark squared bishop. It's not like this queen is threatening to infiltrate here. Okay, even if the queen does decide to come over here, what is it going to capture? There's nothing to capture over here. It's unsupported by any of its other pieces, so it's not really making any real threats. Right? If the dark squared bishop were here, okay, maybe there's something happening, but without the dark squared bishop, there's nothing. And so we see sort of that Christopher Yu is just kind of strategically lost for a lot of this game. Black decided kind of this interesting idea to trade the queen for the rook and the knight to sort of try to get some sort of imbalance. But okay, black's pieces are just very, very uncoordinated at this point. This bishop, once again, is just not good. It's not doing anything. White's pieces, on the other hand, this knight's great, right? Hitting these squares. This queen is great, already on the 7th rank. Yeah, this is just very, very difficult for black to defend. And we see later in this position here, Christopher Yu had been in a difficult position for a while and had overlooked this elementary tactic, knight d6 check. Obviously, white wins sort of whatever he decides to capture in the next move. So, right. So this was kind of one of Mishra's best games, and so we're excited to go ahead and see him in this year's iteration of the Tata Steel Challengers, which will take place in January. All right, and so the last game that we'll go ahead and look at for today. This day in chess, November 9th, 1985, Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov played the final game of their second match for the World Championship. The year prior, 1984, Karpov had won in a very controversial match that was cut short and that Kasparov thought was very unfair. We're not going to get into it here, but obviously you can read about it online. Very famous controversy. This year, as defending champion, Karpov only needed a drawn score in order to win the match, but he was going into this game. Kasparov was leading 12 points to 11, and so Karpov actually needed a win here in order to retain his title. Fortunately for Karpov, he had the white pieces, and so he went in for e4. They went to this Scheveningen, entered through Najdorf move order. The reason why you enter this through Najdorf move order is that if you play e6 right now, white can get g4 in, your bishop is shut out from defending the g4 square, white's going to get g5, f4, and white's going to build an attack that's very difficult for black to meet unless black knows exactly what he's doing. So this is why you usually enter now the Scheveningen through Najdorf move order. So Karpov got a very aggressive sort of position. You see g4, g5, building an attack toward the king side, putting a lot of pressure on Kasparov. Obviously, this is the way you want to play when you're playing for a win. And they got into this position. And it's very, very difficult to find a good move for black here. White is threatening a lot, actually. White is threatening to push with f5. White is threatening bishop d4, which would remove, this defender. White is also threatening queen h4, queen h7, very hard. This pawn can't move forward, obviously, because it's going to get captured. This knight actually has a lot of duties currently. It needs to be able to come to f8 in order to defend h7, so that way if white plays queen h4, there's knight h7. So it's very, very hard to find a move here already. The idea also is if black makes a nothing move and white plays here, and black tries to defend this very important bishop by playing a move like e5, well, white can capture here. White's threatening right here. If this knight takes, obviously this knight can't still come over here to defend h7, so white has a ready attack already. So very difficult to find a good move here. Kasparov ended up playing, and he said in an interview with the New Yorker that this was one of the most difficult moves for him to find over the board. Rook e7. Very unnatural sort of move. Obviously, this, like the rook is only here to defend f7. It's very strange to move your rook to a place where it only has one way out, and to a place where you're not really trying to play this pawn push. But it turns out the idea is, of course, after this pawn is defended, so that way if white plays bishop d4, here takes, black can actually take back with the pawn, and f7 is defended. The move apparently was so psychologically strange and difficult for Karpov to meet that he kind of couldn't come up with a plan to continue attacking. It's funny because f5 is actually still a good move in this position, continuing to break into the position. But instead, Karpov decided to sort of shuffle his pieces around, maybe see if an attack could come up elsewhere, maybe see if the arrangement of black's pieces would reveal a weakness somewhere else on the board. But because Karpov wasn't really decisive, Kasparov was able to start sort of repositioning his pieces. They were becoming more active, right? Kasparov played this f5, so now white no longer had f5. And then white started to fall into this position where it turned out actually he started to become worse. And so they continued playing. They got into this position where actually now black's best is to go into this drawn endgame, but Karpov is playing for a win here, so he doesn't really want to go in for a draw. So he starts playing just wild moves. Kasparov keeps his head and defends very sensibly, starts to counterattack. And in this position, white resigns. Obviously, white's going to lose a rook here. White's king is very exposed. This is just a crushing position. And so with this game, Kasparov is actually able to, this is the first time that he took the title, and he was able to become the 13th chess champion. All right, that about wraps it up for your chess coverage for today. We'll be back with more news and analysis tomorrow. This is Sean from the E5 Outpost. See you later, chess world.